Neat. You
Okay,
can
now it's pausing.
you can continue or leave. It's the the entrance to the inward path, the place where you sacrifice to go inward and burn out your ego, essentially. And the more I go inward, you know, what I'm left with is sharing what worked for me. That's what I end up being left with, is sharing what worked for me. And I don't think I know the only way to do that. It's like Trivita has a very different point of view about vaccinations, for example. And I have no quarrel with her about that. It's like, what path doesn't lead eventually to home in the divine? That's where I come from. And it doesn't matter whether she believes this about vaccinations or that about vaccinations. And it doesn't matter what I believe about vaccinations, this or that. There's going to be, in 8 billion people, an awful lot of different understandings of what vaccinations are and what they mean. And I respect that. I think all of those, everyone should follow that path, and wherever it goes, ultimately, we're all going to end up in the same place, returning to the divine, to the God, whatever we understand that is. And so I think about ceremonies, you know, and it's like, I still occasionally get somebody asking me to marry them, and I'm glad to do that. But you know, it's not me that makes that whole thing sacred. It's the fact that two sacred beings are making promises to each other. That's what's holding fast. And how authentically are they capable of making those promises? I failed. And I wasn't very good at it, you know. Anyway, I really do think that this is all ceremony. This is as important a ceremony as the full moon. I think the difference is we don't focus as people. Whereas somebody said, okay, this is a point of focus. We are going to have a ceremony, and you are going to put your mind into a very specific kind of place. And we're going to call that a ceremony, a full moon ceremony. And I know there's benefit of that. I mean, you're a good example. You said very clearly once, you know, you never realized you could leave your body, go somewhere else, and actually meet a lot of people and all agree on what the heck was going on. That was an eye-opening experience for you. And maybe that was the real value of doing it. It had nothing to do with attunements and full moons, and you know, it had to do with recognizing that there is something about us that allows us to do some incredibly strange things from this point of view of this reality. We can just disappear into another place and actually meet people. We can Zoom without Zoom. You know, we can do that. And we did it for years and years and years. And many, many people, there were close to 300 people on that medicine. So that's a lot of people understanding that they can do that. And I've had some come back and say, well, it's all in our imagination, meaning it's not real. Okay. And my response is, what makes you think your imagination isn't real? That's a whole other conversation. So personally, I've just seen ceremony as less important because I live in it. I don't care whether I'm sitting on a John or I'm doing a jigsaw puzzle or I'm watching television. It's strange. I watch television and I think, what kind of thought pattern allows you to create a situation, because I think we all create our own reality, in which stabbing people until they're dead and then stabbing them after that is required. What kind of belief system has to exist in that subconscious we don't want to ever look at that allows that kind of action to take place? And so I'm watching TV and I'm watching a whole nother question. It's like a classroom. They're up there doing all these strange things, and I'm thinking, okay, what do you have to believe in your deepest recesses of your heart that that's okay? I was just listening to news about Burma. What's the current name of Burma? Myanmar. And the soldier was saying how they were beating people just unmercifully, and they weren't allowed to watch anything except the government news. And he broke his rifle so it wouldn't work, and it gave him an excuse to go somewhere. And in the process, he ran away and went to India for sanctuary, and that's where he was reporting from. But he still didn't let his name out because he had family in Myanmar. Well, what kind of thinking pattern? What kinds of beliefs must you have to, do something like the Nazis did? Because there's no fundamental difference. So for me, that's ceremony. It's like, okay, I'm trying to come to grips with how people do that. The mirroring stuff is exactly the same way. And I'll repeat some of this. This is starting the session. We're close enough to do that. I was watching a friend that I really respect and a healer, one of my oldest friends in North Carolina. And she was dissing a politician. I can't say I haven't done that. No. But I looked at it and I thought, does she realize she's mirroring? Did she realize that she's mirroring herself in terms of what she's subjecting to in this politician? And so I started this dialogue in the tribe of healers. And it didn't take me but, an instant to realize that when I was seeing her dissing a politician, I was mirroring myself without being aware of that. It took me as soon as I thought about her, I began to realize that if I'm watching her, she's also a mirror for me. And I'm watching her diss this politician. And I thought, at that very instant, I was trying to figure out how I envisioned the Republican politicians in Arizona running through millions of votes and envelopes and signatures and all that stuff, trying to find fraud. And I got this image of the optimistic little kid in the stable shoveling horse manure, and they asked him why he was so happy. And he says, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony here somewhere. And I thought, that's how I see that GOP in Arizona going through those. There's got to be fraud here someplace. Has to be. I can't. And they're happily shoveling through literally millions and millions of votes by hand, trying to find somebody whose signature doesn't match, whatever it is. And so I find that's the part people have difficulty with. It's easy to see the mirroring of other people. Is it easy to see that you're mirroring yourself? And then one of the members, another person I have a lot of respect for, said, well, don't we also have feelings of self-worth, feelings of pride and self-worth and courage and love. And I thought, well, of course she's right. People do. And my first thought was, well, we don't repress that. And then I realized that wasn't true at all, because there's a whole lot of people running around with very low self-esteem. And that got back to the healer's question. How do healers who are mirroring somebody with them, and in any case, for me, that's ceremony, that's prayer. It's how I'm not asking for anything except to come to some kind of grip with what I am. And what I am is still well beyond my greatest imagination. Any case, it's 7 o'clock, so folks like to bring themselves into the circle and share a little bit about what's been going on in their week. I've been doing it for 15 minutes. So, Owen, would you pick up the stick, please, and bring yourself in? Spiritual.
Is it possible to divide it up into all 6 topics?
Well, let's find out. So what's the full moon mean to each of us? Because I think the thing that's important is that there are so many beliefs about the full moon across the sphere of mankind that it's amazing. One of the really common ones is the lunatic. You know, well, the full moon represents something that brings out the crazy in people. And there are a certain amount of statistics in certain areas that appears to be true. There are certain places where hospital admissions go up, particularly mental hospital admissions.
I was going to meetings in Poughkeepsie, and there were nurses there from a lot ward, and they said explicitly that the 3 or 4 days around the full moon were always more exciting.
Yep. I've heard the same thing from friends in the police.
This is from people who don't even have an outside window.
Yeah. Physiologically, it's pretty clear that the full moon affects our species. Females, if there's a group of females together who are friends, their periods will come into sync at the full moon or near that. Now, there are a whole lot of ifs, ands, and buts around that, because it does seem to require some kind of community or communal situation where women are in relatively constant contact with one another, and their periods get synced over time. And the sync is typically during the full moon period. No pun intended. But it's also true it affects men, because a huge percentage of our bodies are essentially liquid, and there's a shift in gravity that occurs when the moon and the earth rotate.
It's tidal.
Yeah. And that's an exquisitely sensitive measure. But I do know people who are affected by it and can tell without windows when the moon is full. They may not even say the moon is full, but they definitely reflect that impact in their change in the way their circulatory system functions, the way the liquids in their body shift. And that certainly has to lead to beliefs about the power of the moon. having little or nothing to do with spiritual aspects, except if we create it, then it is infinitely tied to spiritual notions. So I didn't think about the full moon for most of my life. I've come to believe that that is part of what the Cree would call the cycle of life. Well, there's a cycle of life within the heavens as well. There's a cycle with the sun cycle and the lunar cycle, and the months are predicated on that cycle. And they do that because the land where they live in the far north, it changes radically with the seasons. And so the Cree calendar is 13 moons, not 12. So they have 13 months, not 12. But they're predicated on, they don't keep a calendar that way. They actually look all the time when it's happening. And so the clock is not an abstract notion of a calendar or a clock. It's the notion of where did the moon show up last night. And since they don't notice that change to squeeze 13 months into 12 months, they don't have any conflict about that kind of stuff. Ceremonially, the moon was really important to me in terms of understanding how medicine Reiki worked and how the moon impacted the way people thought about that. It allowed us to talk about seeing ourselves as beings in progression, that we weren't static. When we went to the full moon, it wasn't the same every full moon because we weren't the same every full moon. And it also gave us an opportunity to look at our potential as it was fulfilling itself, whereas the new moon showed us other things.
If you go to a broader notion of astrology, there seems to be a sort of a coincidence between a great many variables I remember a time that I tried to, go there, and after a while it got just so involved that I said, all right, I don't know. I think my head can do what it needs to do without understanding it.
Mm. I poo-pooed the whole full moon thing, the Farmer's Almanac thing for most of my life. It just was incidental to my life. I didn't think it had any real value. I looked at it from an astronomical point of view. And I didn't believe in astrology at all. I think I thought of that as kind of fake science. And then one of the books I was reading that flows out of A Course in Miracles, it says that in fact, all of those things out there revolving around one another and around the sun, all in fact do have an influence on us. It didn't confirm the definitions of astrology, but it did confirm that we were influenced by the motions of planetary bodies and their relationship to one another. And I thought that was a surprise because I was really completely looking at it as superstition more than anything else. And I've since changed my judgment of that, but I've not dug into it to try and discover more about it. It's just, okay, I'm going to stop saying that's nonsense and just say, okay, it's true, I just don't understand it, which I can live with equally well.
Well, also, I would say that the Aufklärung, the age of reason, notion of science, to my mind, represents a particular kind of context that are rules of the road, which have become more and more entrenched. And what to say? Since approximately Luther, that somehow or another, if I read the Greeks, if I read, oh, what's his name? The cycles and the epicycles.
While you're thinking about it, let's get other folks a chance to say what they see the full moon representing to them. How do they perceive it? Teresa, would you like to pick up the stick and share your notions about what the meaning of the full moon is and how that affects you?
Sure. One thing I like about the full moon is it's like a universal symbol. I think anybody in the entire world can see the moon. It's not something that, that's unique to one environment or another. It also controls the tides. So I think people can relate to that and the power of the moon, if it can control the tides. And also they say that we're a lot of water in us. So it, I don't know, that sometimes people, they debate that, but a lot of people say it affects us too because of the water. I just read something recently that said people sleep less or a lighter sleep during the full moon. So there's a lot of things going on around the moon that are kind of scientific or universal, and I think that's cool. And one thing I also wanted to say, I was going to write to Meenakshi, another thing that's cool is I like the smile meditation, because that's so universal. It's like brilliant and ingenious, I thought. And anyways, that's another subject, I guess. But I like the universal symbols because anyone can relate to them. I remember some people have trouble with no matter what. I don't think of, like, I even had someone have trouble with animals. They just don't like animals. I mean, I don't know if I really know anybody that doesn't like the moon. I think it's kind of cool. It's a cool symbol and it's interesting. I think in the Native American way, they usually call it the grandmother moon, and they think of it as a grandmother. So it's another thought.
That's a really good point that I omitted, but which I have come to accept. I mean, from a Cree point of view, the moon is as much a person as you or I. It is a consciousness. It is self-aware. It has a spirit, and that's the way they see it, and that's the way they behave towards it. So mostly, it's the warm fuzzies. I mean, that's the grandmother image in Cree country. That's the. For example, in the Cree, only the grandmothers and grandfathers can give children sweets, candy, cookies, chocolate. And so their image of what a grandmother is projected well into the moon. But that's I don't know, that's a different issue because we're putting people up there. Where the Chinese want to set up a colony on the far side. We don't want them to get there too far ahead of us. The Russians, I'm not sure how they're going to act. India's put up a satellite. Grandmother Moon is soon going to have to deal with mom and pop human at a level that's not been necessary in the past when we walk with feet upon the moon. Owen, how do you perceive The moon. Where is the horn? Meenakshi?
Pick my left hand or my right hand and I'll tell one story. I'm joking. I always feel that the full moon calls me because I'll be just like right now, I'm feeling very uncomfortable. You know why? Because I love to go and see the moon rise. And it's just rising right now as we speak. And I'm getting torn. I almost felt like saying, "Do you mind if I just go to Matheson Hammer Park to see it rise?" Because we're very lucky to live in a place where we can see it rise over the ocean, and it's very near my house, so I love doing that. Um, but also recently, it struck me something very interesting about the full moon, and I think I have shared it before, and you may have heard me saying it. And for me, I also think of the moon as a metaphor for many things. I don't mind whatever the scientists find and don't find because those things keep changing. Somebody says it makes you crazy, somebody says it doesn't. All that is just depends on whom they are recording and whom they are talking to. And I don't think many researchers really listen to people, you know. So but from my own experience, what I feel is what appeals to me. And so I realized recently that the moon is full when it rises at sunset, and it's new, or in other words, we don't see it when it rises along with the sun. So, uh, when do we show our light, and when is it that our light can be seen? It depends on who we are walking with. And yet, it doesn't mean that when the moon is new, it doesn't have its own light or its own presence, or like Tree said, its own universal being self. It is still there. On the dark moon, we don't say we don't say there's no moon, we say there's new moon, and we can still actually see it very faint, if it depending on how clear the skies are. Um, so I think for me, the moon represents so much learning about the light.
I
That's
think that last comment about new moons is interesting because what it's the new moon we are perceiving is reflecting what is reflecting Earth light, which is a reflection of the sun. I mean, it's really kind of an interesting situation, you know, where we don't often think of the Earth as a source of light, but when we see the new moon, that's what we're seeing, Earth light, um, sunlight reflected back to the moon from the Earth. Uh, let's play with ceremony for a bit, if that's all right with everybody. I don't care whether you consider it your imagination or daydreaming or what, and I don't care whether you have your eyes closed or open, whichever works for you. Um, but I want you to picture a candle in front of you and some matches. Just watch it for a moment. It's not lit yet. Take a few deep breaths. And when you're comfortable, light the candle. Just see the candle lit in front of you. Now, we can use that candle for light if we go into the dark. And I want you to imagine there is a fire somewhere that I have lit. Call it a third space, or call it whatever you will. Call it a wilderness place. There is a fire burning. And I invite you to go there and take a candle with you. And if you're having trouble finding the fire, ask for a guide to show you the way. I favor the hummingbird, but I've heard a lot of different guides in my time, and whatever guide works for you, ask your guide to lead you to the fire. And imagine we're sitting around the fire as though we were camping. And we're sitting on whatever we find comfortable. And the fire's warm. Too close, we're too hot on one side, too cold on the other. Relax and breathe a bit. And we'll just watch the fire. Just watch the fire. And I don't know where we are in terms of the Earth or the moon, but if we look up, there is a moon, a bright moon in the sky. It's on the horizon. You can see that moon, and it's pink. I don't know why it's pink, but it's pink. And there's the moon. And the moon has left a gift for each of you. You'll find it down between your legs, on the ground, in a little bag. It's just a gift from Grandmother Moon. I don't know what's in it. And you don't have to open it. But if you want to open your gift, take a look. Just open the bag and see what's in there. The fire's getting low. Back home, the clock's ticking down. So at your leisure, grab your candle and your gift. And come back and open your eyes. And take a look at this world. I can't see the full moon yet, but I'm in a mountain, in a kind of a valley, and the mountains are still hiding it. Oh, but now you're getting clever. You've got a calendar, a candle. I love it. I don't think fast enough to do that. Okay, let's talk about it. Did it work? That's the first question, is how were you able to travel? Was your imagination or your daydream or whatever you want to call it, was it functioning? Some people are not vision people, they have a hard time seeing, and some people catch it more easily. So share your experience. What was it like for you to just do this, whether it worked or didn't work? What was it like for you? John, you want to jump in?
It was a little bit difficult to light the candle. Something about the wick. It lit. I mean, eventually. But I remember having some trouble with it. I don't have experience invoking a guide, but I got the idea. And you know, if anybody wants to take me where I'm going, you know, what to say? I guess I could use the help. Um, Whether anything took me up on that or not, I don't know. But we got to the fire. The moon that was in the sky was neither full nor new. Um, and I think I'm a particular in my present condition. I'm sensitive to heat and cold, so I noticed that the fireside is warmer and the other side is colder. I think that's most of what I can think of to report.
Did you have a gift?
I did not look at it.
Cool. Thank you.
I almost forgot to bring it back.
Hi. Who wants to go next?